right, I'm so excited today to have Rebecca Beesley from Juvenile Arthritis Research all the way from the UK. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm so happy to have you. I wish we were in person, but Zoom is the next best. So can you tell me real quick, where do you, well, I already gave away where you live, and where do you live and what is your relationship to arthritis?
I live in the UK. In the part of the UK that I'm in is in Kent, so it's not too far from London. And I had my own condition is the fact I've had juvenile idiopathic arthritis since the age of 10, and I also have a daughter with the condition, and she's had it since the age of 2, and she's now 11. And we also run a charity, myself and my husband, called Juvenile Arthritis Research, which I'm sure we'll talk about a bit later
Mhm.
on.
Oh, I didn't know you went with your husband too. That's awesome. It's a family affair. Yeah, and so I'm curious, yeah, you said you were diagnosed when you were 10. Can you share a little more about your diagnosis journey? Like what were your first symptoms and what was that like?
So I was a very, very sporty kid. So I loved netball, I loved hockey, long jump, and I first noticed I was getting pain in my hip. Um, it was usually during sports. So I remember the first time I remember it very specifically was during a netball game. And after the netball, I could barely walk because my hip was just so sore. And it felt like almost like a twisting pain. I couldn't describe it other than it felt like a twisting sensation in my hip. And I just noticed it started to happen more and more frequently, until eventually it got to the point the pain was so bad one day, I was sat down in assembly at school and I couldn't get up off the floor, and I got rushed to hospital that day, ended up staying in hospital, but the doctors at the time couldn't see anything obvious wrong. It was an orthopedic doctor. They did X-rays and they said, "We can't see anything wrong. We think she's putting it on and pretending that she's in pain to get out of going to school." And that
Oh
as a 10-year-old
no.
who loved school, that was devastating to hear. And
Oh,
my
horrible.
mum, bless her, she kept going back to the doctors at various points and saying, "There's something wrong with my child. I want to know what's wrong." And I just don't feel she was taken seriously. So it was a long, long road to diagnosis. It took about a year before I eventually got my, official diagnosis, and a couple of hospital stays. So the second time I was in hospital for over a month before I
Wow.
finally got that diagnosis. So yeah, quite a long journey.
Wow, and I mean, it's no surprise I didn't see anything on the X-ray because in case people don't know, an X-ray only shows like typically really bad damage that's gone all the way to the bone. Like nowadays, they do more like diagnostic ultrasound and other more sensitive measures. But I'm so sorry you went through that. There's nothing worse than that feeling of being not believed, by medical professionals and accusing you of wanting to get out of school when you had no history of that and you loved school. I'm so sorry. That's just awful. Ugh. At least I'm glad that your parents were such good advocates for you. So you were in the hospital for a whole month before your diagnosis. What were they trying to figure out if it was lupus or something else or
Exactly, because back in those days, as this case is still now, a diagnosis of JAA is by process of elimination. So they had to rule out TB, they had to rule out all sorts of other conditions, and there was no specialism such as pediatric rheumatology. So I did happen to see an adult rheumatologist at the time early on, and he kind of gave me a quick check over and said, "No, this isn't arthritis." And eventually, having tested for everything else, they ended up concluding it was arthritis. I actually had to have an operation, like a hip biopsy, where they cut into. I've got quite a long scar on my hip, where they had to test for other things. Had to take bone samples and test for everything else as well. So in many ways, things have improved. That with pediatric rheumatology now, they can do a thorough examination of a child's joints and be able to say, yes, this is JA. So that's a really good thing that nowadays we have that didn't happen back then.
yeah, and did you have the systemic symptoms like fever or fatigue, any of that?
Not
Okay.
not for me. No, for me, it was mainly my left hip that was affected, so it
Mm.
was oligoarthritis just in my left hip mainly.
Okay, wow, and what was your and your family's response to the diagnosis? Were you, like, relieved, or were you scared, or a mix of everything?
So, I think this is where children are kind of more resilient than adults in many ways, because as a child going through it, I don't remember being particularly worried in the way that when my daughter started showing symptoms, there was a big worry as a parent. I was thinking, I want to know what's wrong with her, and all sorts of things go through your mind because I think as an adult you're aware of so many more things, so many more conditions that something could be, and that worry is just there. But for myself as a child, I don't remember being particularly worried about my future or what it could be. I just knew that something was wrong and I kind of wanted it just to get better. And I always assumed it would get better. I did have moments where I did feel quite emotional. And one of those times that I remember very specifically was the day of the actual diagnosis. And the doctor that kind of delivered that news, it was told in such a flippant way that I felt he didn't really understand that to a child to be told, you've got this long-term condition. And I remember him saying, oh, she's going to have quite severe symptoms for around at least 2 years. And then he just carried on talking. And to a child, 2 years is forever. And I don't think he really appreciated that. So that was the first time that I actually thought, oh my goodness, 2 whole years before I'm going to see any kind of improvement. And that I felt quite emotional over that because I'd kind of assumed once they find out what's wrong, they'll make me better and it'll all be okay. I also remember another time where I felt particularly emotional was after my long stay in hospital and going home, and seeing my bedroom for the first time in over a month. And I just remember I looked at the ceiling, and compared to the hospital ceilings, it was this old building, the hospital, big wards and really high ceilings. And going home and just seeing my little low ceiling, I just burst out crying, and I couldn't really explain why. But I think it was all that emotion, everything I'd been holding in from what I'd been through. It all just came out that evening, seeing my ceiling at home.
Oh my gosh. I relate to so much of what you're saying in terms of I think most kids, and people who have adults who have no experience with chronic illness, if you have pain in one area of your body, you kind of assume it's an injury or maybe it's, yeah, the bone isn't growing correctly or something, and that they'll be able to, the doctors will go fix it.
Yeah.
And then you find out that they're not going to be able to fix it. And that it's something you're going to have the rest of your life. That's a very daunting prospect. And I think your example of the doctor saying, 2 more years, that seems like so long as a 10-year-old. That makes sense. It's 20% of your life is 2 years, right? So that's really tough. At the same time, like you're saying, on the other hand, you're just kind of like, okay, we'll just deal with this because you don't really know. We don't really have perspective as a kid. Do you mind sharing before we're gonna get into more like understanding what happens when you grow up and you become an adult who has had juvenile idiopathic arthritis? There's a lot of kind of misconceptions out there. But first, can you share a little bit about your treatments that you've tried over the years, like what's helped and what's currently going well with your treatments?
Yeah. So in my situation, and I think a lot of people who hear this are quite shocked to hear it, I have never been on any DMARDs, so no methotrexate, no biologics. And part of the reason for that is when I was first diagnosed, it was in the 1980s, and those treatments weren't available. And the only pain relief options I had were paracetamol and ibuprofen, which did nothing to actually modify the disease. So my joint became very deformed and damaged very quickly. So within that, I think by the time they did give my diagnosis, it was showing on X-rays as being damaged, my hip joint. So um, after going through that and being several years on crutches, not being able to walk properly, I kind of got to the point where every time I was just going for my checkups, they were saying, well, there's nothing more we can do for you. And so I almost fell out of the medical system at the age of probably about 15, because I was told there's nothing more we can do. And and I think we'll go on to talk about this, about the difference between JAA and other types of arthritis. I suppose I never had reason to believe anything was different if I was to go back. So I then didn't get to see a proper rheumatologist until a few years ago. So I've spent most of my life self-managing my condition with a very deformed, damaged hip joint. And
Wow.
yeah, so I think it's so great that the medications are there nowadays, and the outlook for children is so much brighter than it was, like, for me back then. And there are lessons I've learned through what I've been through that I don't want other people to go through. And part of that is understanding your own condition better so that you can advocate for yourself better.
Wow.
Because I think sometimes if I knew what I know now, maybe a few decades ago, my whole disease course might have been different. There might be things that would have worked out better for me.
Yeah, or wow, that is totally makes sense when you say it like that. Like that you were told there's nothing more they could do for you. And if you don't have regular checkups with the doctor, you don't know that there's been this gigantic shift in the 2000s in rheumatic disease care and treatments. I'm sad thinking about you suffering for all those years. And I mean, I'm wondering, how did you manage pregnancy and stuff like that? Where did you go into remission during pregnancy or?
In in many ways, it was kind of simpler not being on that kind of medication, because I know
Mhm,
there's so many considerations. If someone's on DMARDs or biologics, they have
mhm.
to be in close discussion with their doctor before they try and have a baby. So in a way, it took those worries out of the equation. But I do remember I did speak to my doctor, as in my general family
Mhm.
doctor, before we started a family. And the main thing I was concerned about was the mobility in my hip was very restricted.
Yeah, yeah,
And I remember discussing it with the midwife as well through pregnancy and saying, is this going to be a problem? Because I have such limited mobility in that hip. That leg could barely move one way or another. And she said, "Oh no, don't worry. It's not like on the telly." She said, "It's not legs up in stirrups wide apart. But,
yeah,
labour is very different from that. You can be in different positions. It won't be an issue." Um, but I feel they didn't really, like, no one examined my hip to actually check for themselves. So then through my first pregnancy and labour, sure enough, they said, "Right, now we need to put your legs in stirrups." And I'm like, "I can't do that." So it did become an issue. So I ended up, I went through the whole of um, like labour until I was ready to give birth without any pain relief. And then at the very last moment, they said, "Oh, we are going to need to give you a spinal now." So
mhm.
that was kind of a bit disappointing. I thought, "Oh, I wish either I'd had the spinal sooner so that I didn't have all the pain of the labour,
Yeah,
or that
yeah,
they'd listened to me better kind of sooner to have kind of made a plan for it
yeah.
really."
Yeah, it's one of my little pet peeves, but I understand it, that so often doctors are like, they they're trying to assuage your worries and fears and be like, "It's gonna be okay." It's gonna be like, to make you feel better in the moment, but that's not helpful if it's not actually gonna be okay long term. You know what I mean? They're like, "I don't
Yeah,
wanna worry you." You're like, "No, I knowledge is power." Like, I
yeah,
want to know. So I'm sorry that, yeah, I mean, as an occupational therapist, I'm sitting here like, "Oh my gosh, you're telling someone who has significant hip damage that's pregnant that there's gonna be no problem, like, giving birth? Holy moly." And the problem is you don't want to necessarily cut off someone's sensation completely because, I mean, I'm not an expert. This is not about childbirth, but when you cut off your sensation, when you cut off the sensation of pain through like a spinal, then if people are manipulating your body and you can't feel the pain, you don't get that signal that, oh, things are like in the wrong, you know, the ball was out of the socket in your hip joint or whatnot. So anyway,
yeah,
sorry, I don't mean to go down that rabbit hole, but I'm just, I'm putting these puzzle pieces together. You've been through a lot. And I want to hear more about, your experience being a mom with juvenile idiopathic arthritis. But let's talk about demystifying juvenile idiopathic arthritis. What happens if you as a child get diagnosed with JIA and then become an adult? I used to think, I think what a lot of people are think, which is that, well, when you're a kid, it's juvenile arthritis, and when you're an adult, it's adult arthritis. But actually, that's not the case. So help
yeah.
us understand what's going on.
So again, this is another thing that came as a surprise to me when I learnt about it. So having been out of the medical system for so long, I knew I'd been diagnosed with, it was actually called juvenile chronic arthritis back then. And I know it's gone by other names. I know in the States, juvenile rheumatoid arthritis is one of the names it's had previously, but it is in effect, it's juvenile idiopathic arthritis is the condition I had, but by a slightly different name. And so once I became an adult, I couldn't understand that it would be called juvenile, because juvenile means like a young person. And so I just assumed I had, when I'd go to the doctor and I'd say I've got arthritis, they'd say, "Oh, rheumatoid arthritis." And that's what the kind of the general practitioners, the GPs, would write on my notes, rheumatoid arthritis. And I didn't know any better to correct them. So I thought, well, they're the doctor, they know, so it must be when you grow up, you have rheumatoid arthritis, and when you're a child, you have juvenile arthritis. And it was only when my own daughter was diagnosed, and I remember discussing it with one of her doctors, and I was saying, "Well, I've had arthritis since the age of 10." And I can't remember, I might have said something like, "I have, I now have rheumatoid arthritis," and they looked a bit puzzled. Um, and I said, "I'd never know quite how to explain my arthritis." And they said, "Well, you're an adult with JAA." And it was so obvious to them that that's what it is. That a pediatric rheumatologist, they know that when you're an adult with JAA. But to me, that came as a shock. And I thought to myself, I felt a little bit kind of cheated all my life. Like I thought, why has no one told me this before? Surely somebody should have said, no, your condition is called JIA throughout your whole lifetime. So yeah, that came as a little bit of a surprise and a shock. So since then, that's something that I'm very aware of when I see people say, I've had rheumatoid arthritis since the age of 5. I'm thinking to myself, no, if they were diagnosed, before the age of 16, or not actually the diagnosis even, but the symptom onset before the age of 16, then it is juvenile idiopathic arthritis. So I know sometimes teenagers, they may get diagnosed age kind of 17, 18, but their symptoms have been there prior to the age of 16. So, that in that case, it is also juvenile idiopathic arthritis. So basically, if
Yeah.
your symptoms have been there before the age of 16, it's JIA. And it doesn't change, it doesn't automatically become rheumatoid arthritis, osteoarthritis, or any other type of arthritis. It remains called juvenile idiopathic arthritis throughout your life. And hopefully, in many cases, people do go into remission either through medication or spontaneous unmedicated remission, and that's what we always hope for. But that diagnosis is for life, and how it's named.
Yeah, and that's really helpful for me to review because yeah, I know for sure I was diagnosed at 21 and my symptoms started at 19 and they said, you have adult rheumatoid arthritis. There are kids that have, a similar condition, but because I think that they evaluated whether I might have had JAE because I had so many things that I thought were injuries as, soccer play I was a soccer player, very sporty like you, football player. As they call it in the UK. But the other thing I wanted to talk about that a lot of people don't know is that juvenile idiopathic arthritis and rheumatoid arthritis are different diseases with different prognoses. If you have a Venn diagram, of course, you're going to overlap on the fact of, joint inflammation caused by your immune system, similar to like psoriatic arthritis, joint pain, or, ankylosing spondylitis. But JIA, what are some of the other, sorry, I didn't prepare you for this, but I'm guessing you know off the top of your head. What are some of the other things that are different for JIA in terms of either the long-term prognosis or the medications and stuff like that versus RA?
So JAA itself, as you will know, is not one condition. That is made up
Yeah,
of several subtypes, which are different conditions
that's a good
themselves.
point.
One of those subtypes is more similar to rheumatoid arthritis, which again doesn't help with the whole confusion confusion thing. Um, and many of the medications are either similar or the same, and many of the challenges we face. So when I watch your videos on Instagram and all the tips and things, all the advice you give, I think, yeah, a lot of that is relevant, to me and for those with JA. So a lot of the challenges we face are similar. People get it. The fatigue does affect children with JA, and fatigue can
Right,
affect people
right.
with RA. A lot of the symptoms, like you say, the joint pain and stiffness, and morning stiffness and that kind of thing. There are many many similarities. Um, and I just want to start by saying I'm not a medical expert. I'm not a doctor. So in terms of the actual detail of the conditions, I do not personally know enough about which medications, how the
Oh,
medications and
right.
things would vary. I don't have the answers to those um, myself, but I do know it is really really important to get that labeling right and to get that naming right, because one of the questions that as a parent I have, and I hear other parents have all the time, is they want to know, how are things going to be in the long run for my child? And the
Mhm.
truth is that the answers to that are not known. And one of the reasons for that is because of this mislabeling that's happened. So the research that when the
Yeah.
researchers look at the doctor's records and the GP's records, because they cannot see for sure which adults would have had JAA because it's then been
Mhm.
renamed on their records as RA, it makes it a lot harder for when they're carrying out those research projects. There is work being done as we speak to try and look at the long-term outcomes and the long-term prognosis. But to date, that's been something very, very hard to establish. because of this kind of mislabeling and people not understanding themselves what their condition is in the longer term.
Yeah, I and this is maybe a little bit old, but I remember reading on the Arthritis Foundation website that it that the rates of remission for juvenile idiopathic arthritis are thought to be higher than adult rheumatoid arthritis, but maybe you just pointed out that maybe that's not based on actual, maybe they look artificially lower because those people are now who grow up are not considering themselves to have JIA anymore. Maybe, but
Maybe so I think, and again I would have to check very specifically, but I think the remission rates for JAA are around 50%, and I think that's
Mhm.
something that's not been changed since I was a child. So since 30 years ago, the remission rates were largely the same. And I think you're right in what you say, because with
It's definitely
RA
lower
and
rheumatoid arthritis.
particularly for kind of rheumatoid factor positive
Yeah,
arthritis,
yeah.
that's a harder one to get under control and to get into remission, from what I understand. But you probably know more about this than I
Yeah,
do.
I'm just looking at the Arthritis Foundation website as we're talking. I'm always like have 12 tabs open in my brain. But yeah, it's 10 to, it looks like it's 10 to 30% of people go into remission from RA who were not treated or who were not initially uh okay, how do I say this word? I'm trying to say this exactly how they said it. Um For people who don't begin treatment within 2 years of first symptoms or who don't start biologics early, remission will range from 10 to 33%. And that's talking about little or medicated remission. So that's the other thing. And so anyway, we can get those statistics. I can put them in the show notes. But like you're saying, it's almost we have to remind ourselves when we look at these statistics that they they are not necessarily perfectly
Mhm.
representative because of this issue with it used to being in the US, like you mentioned, the juvenile idiopathic arthritis was called juvenile rheumatoid arthritis. And also there's, this, I'm glad you reminded me. I always think when I'm saying JIA, I'm thinking about the systemic JIA or like the polyarticular, like the one that's more similar to rheumatoid arthritis, adult rheumatoid arthritis. But there are other kinds that are, only one joint affected and not as systemic. So there's a lot as we're uncovering here. A
Yeah,
lot
and
of
yeah,
yeah.
and what you said about that kind of window of opportunity, we know that is true for JAA as well, which is why the prompt
Yes.
diagnosis and prompt treatment is so important, because that window of opportunity does improve the chances of, long-term outcomes being improved as well. So that is, still very relevant and very important as well.
Yeah, and the reason I jumped to that statistic of 10 to 33% because it's the people who weren't treated within the first 2 years of symptoms, because we know that most people don't get diagnosed till like 4 or 5 years after their first symptoms because they're being thrown around like you are, being told you're not sick, you're just anxious, or you're just trying to get out of things. And that happens unfortunately to adults just like it does to kids, which is such a shame. But speaking of all these, we both of us have noticed lots of problems in the medical system and in general awareness of different kinds of arthritis. But I know that you're doing stuff to help solve some of these problems through the Juvenile Arthritis Research Charity. So can you share a little bit more about that and what you do and what are the things you're excited about for like 2024 coming up, which is currently now actually?
So we founded the charity 6 years ago now, and it was my husband who decided to go back to his roots in biomedical research, having had, myself as his wife who'd grown up and he'd seen how it's impacted my life, and then to have a daughter with a condition and to see how little things had changed in terms of awareness, and in terms of obviously the medication side of things has vastly improved, but there was very little in the way of like supporting families and supporting children through this. So he decided that wasn't good enough, and someone has to do something. And he thought, well, why not me? Instead of moaning about it, let's make a difference. So he founded the charity, and the ultimate vision is we want to see a world where no child has to suffer from arthritis. So ultimately, that will be a cure of some kind, whether that is in terms of prevention or finding a permanent solution to make sure every child reaches permanent remission. We don't know what that will look like, but that is what we're pushing for with the research we're involved in. And we have three kind of core aims that most of our work falls into. So it either falls into awareness research or support side of things. And we do so much in 6 short years. We actually do so much thanks to the volunteers within the charity. We've grown to a network of around 25 volunteers now to support families. And
Wow.
it's just been amazing, to see how needed it was. And that's why we've just grown and grown, because, the need was there. And in terms of research, we're very excited that towards the end of last year, we launched a new project in the UK, which we've called the JAA VIP Research Panel. And that's where
Ooh.
families can sign up to say, yes, I'm interested in taking part in research. I'm interested in finding out more about research opportunities. And we can then link them up when there are projects with universities and hospitals or pharmaceuticals, anyone that's looking for families affected by JAA to take part in research. We've got this pool of people who are already interested and they're willing to, be part of research. So that's a really exciting um, thing we've launched, last year, and that's continuing to build. And we've got new projects coming up all the time for that panel of people who want to kind of be involved. Um, in
Really
terms
quick
of
question. Are
yeah,
these for people just in the United Kingdom or is it worldwide for research?
at, at the moment, our research panel is in the UK.
Okay.
We have had people from various other countries saying, "Hey, can you help us do this?" In our country, and I don't see any reason why it wouldn't be able to be rolled out. At the moment,
Mhm.
it's more of a capacity issue because we are a very small charity,
Yes.
and as I said, we're run by volunteers, so it's all kind of fitting in addition to everything else we have going on in our lives. But there's no reason in future why that's not something that could be rolled out to make it available more widely. But at the moment, that is UK only. In terms of our support services and support information, again, the physical resources that we send out. So when the child is diagnosed with JAA, um, they will hear about us either through their hospital or if they go online and search for information. We have these what we call little box of hope packs that we send out to
Oh,
them.
I love
And
that.
that was an idea by a lovely young volunteer of ours called Abby. And when she was 7 years old, she said to her mum, I don't like the idea of children being diagnosed with JA and not having anyone to turn to, so we need to do something. So she came up with this idea of sending them a little pack with all the information and everything in there that they need. So for the younger children, that includes a storybook called Kippo, and we send a little Kippo finger puppet, which brings the story to life, and they get
Mhm.
some other information. So we have a booklet called My JAA, which is kind of a guide to living with JA, and it's got information for schools in there and what to expect when you get a diagnosis, and lots. It's just packed with information, so it's a really good booklet. And we have various other bits of information that go in there. And Abby, still to this day, she handwrites a little note for every child who receives one of
Oh
those
my
packs.
gosh.
So it really kind of encourages them and gives them hope to think,
Wow.
there's someone out there that cares about me. And we found quite soon that actually, for the children who are slightly older, kind of over the age of 10, they were finding like the Kippo storybook a bit young for them. So
Mhm.
another young lad called Ned, he wrote a story for teenagers. So he
Mm.
loved the Wimpy Kid books, the Diary of a Wimpy Kid
Yeah,
book. So
yeah.
he wrote it in that kind of style.
Ah,
And that's been
mhm.
published, and that's included in packs for kind of older children. So if you're age 10 and over in the UK, you'd receive one of these, what we call teen support packs. And there's no upper age limit. So I know people as adults who've requested one and they go, wow, this, this story reflects, my experience, and they really relate to it as well. So yeah, that's been really brilliant that we can do that. And we often get inquiries from elsewhere in the world, and they say, please, can you send me a pack? And we can't unfortunately send it outside of the UK because of various, charity regulations in the UK. But we do try
Mm.
and make all of that information available on our website as well. So all of our booklets and publications, by going to the website jarproject.org, you can find all that information to download as well, and lots of other resources on there as well.
That's amazing. I think the Arthritis Foundation in the United States does something similar with like a teddy bear and a little backpack. And yeah, it definitely strikes to me what you said about, adults want this stuff too. Like I know there's so many in the US, there's so many regulations around like what you can put on the wall at a rheumatologist office, right? Like a flyer or anything, much less giving people these packets. But we all want that human touch. We all feel alone sometimes in having these, health challenges. So having something come to you, like a physical thing in the mail, that tells you that someone cares about you and someone wants to give you a little box of hope. I think that's really incredible. And yeah, I mean, I just started Arthritis Life a few years ago, but I'm really in awe of people who are able to like, scale and because and manage volunteers and manage lots of people because that's one thing I've been trying very in a small way to do and it's really hard. Like I've worked for small organizations before or what no grassroots as we call them in the US. I don't know if you call them that in the UK too, but it takes a lot of work. So I'm commending you,
Oh,
like giving you arthritis friendly claps here.
thank you.
I hope you and your husband and family take time to, you know, revel in what you've created because sometimes I know when you're so passionate about what you're doing, it's like you just want to keep doing it. Like how actually okay, this off the top of my head. How do you have a balance in your life? Because if your work is so important to you, but you also need to rest sometimes
Yeah.
too.
So I'm so grateful to our volunteers because as more volunteers have come on board, they have helped so much with
Mm,
everything we do. So I'm so grateful to them because before we got to that stage, it was mainly myself, my husband, and Sam and Abby who send out the packs for the young children. It was mainly
yeah.
us three doing everything. So as we've
Um,
grown and more volunteers have come on board, we've been able to share some of the workload. So as well as the support we give to families, we also have things like school packs. So we have a volunteer that sends out packs to schools
nice.
with specific information for them. And we have another volunteer that does the packs for the teenagers that she sends them out. So all of these people coming on board has just really, really helped us a lot. And sometimes I don't think they realise just how big a help they are to us. So I just want to publicly say thank you to our volunteers because they are amazing, and they all have conditions of their own. Either they have a child with JAA
Okay.
or they have arthritis themselves. So actually, it's a big deal that they're giving up their time to help us, and we're just so grateful for that. In terms of getting the balance right, I don't feel I'm there yet, and I don't know if I ever will be because I think I'm one of those people that I kind of throw myself into everything, like fully, wholeheartedly, passionately into everything. And
Yes.
so I do find it really, really hard to take that kind of time out and take a step back from things. And we will often be sending emails, almost at midnight. We'll be there still working
Yeah.
away, getting things done because we kind of have to, because we think there's no one else actually doing this out there. So if we don't do it, who's going to do it? So we just keep going. And when we don't expect thanks from people, but when we get those messages of thanks from parents that have said, I didn't know who to turn to. Thank you for being there. And even over the Christmas break, um, I kind of look after the social media. So we had a lot of direct messages coming in where everything else is closed. They can't get hold of their hospital
Mm,
teams, any other kind of helplines out there. They closed down over the Christmas break. And people are messaging us saying, I'm really worried or I'm really stuck on this. And we can't give medical advice, but we can be that listening in. We can say,
yeah.
just help them along the way or signpost them to information that we have online or, just help them how we can. And I just think, that makes it all worthwhile knowing that you've been there to help someone at the time they most needed it. And I know when I was younger, if I'd had someone to turn to, I think it would have just made things so much easier. So
Mhm.
we want to be there in that gap where there wasn't support before to help families.
That's incredible, and I relate to you with that. I was laughing to myself as you were talking about working over the weekend because it's Monday when we were recording this, and you and I both emailed a couple times this weekend. And so, yeah, I think you're right that there's never this elusive, perfect sense of balance, but I think what I'm seeing from your story is that you've delegated stuff to volunteers, which is my big skill I'm working on in 2024 because I'm kind of a control freak. So I'm like, I need help. But then it's like when it's time for me to delegate, I'm like, I have to do it all. You're like, wait, no, you need to delegate. It's gonna be okay. And that you're, I think when you are so passionate about something, it sometimes it's so corny to say, but it's like it's not work when it's like your passion. But you still do, as someone with a chronic health condition, we do have to remember to rest and,
Yeah.
not burn the candle at both ends,
Yeah.
as they say. But one thing that is different about your story than mine is that you have a child with juvenile idiopathic arthritis. My son, it's definitely something I keep my eyes out for. He, to my knowledge, doesn't have, any autoimmune condition. I did take him once, side note, into the doctor, just so people don't feel silly who've done this. I took him to the doctor when he was like 2 because he was limping, and I was like, okay, it's it. He's getting JIA. And they're like, he has a splinter. And they took the
Oh,
splinter out. And I was like, "Oh,
oh,
thank you." They're like, "But we're so glad you came," because most people wouldn't know to that that could be a sign, of JIA or could be a sign, who knows? But it was just so funny. They're like, he has a splinter."
Oh, it's
But
it's always best to get things checked out. I always say to parents, if you're ever worried, get it checked out because it's worse
yeah,
to just keep worrying or to not know, and it is that early diagnosis is so important that it is better to, just go and, have your mind put at rest or, just to know
yeah.
what's going on. Yeah.
That's true. That's true. So I'm curious that whatever you want to share about your experience, with your daughter at the age of 2 developing JIA, what's that been like as a mom supporting her through this?
Yeah, so she started with what we thought was an injury, which is quite a common way that children often get misdiagnosed as being told, oh, it's a sports injury, or that they've injured themselves without it being considered to be JA. So yeah, she had an injury to her ankle, and it kind of swelled up. Um, and we took her a few times to our doctor and said, this isn't getting better. But they couldn't see anything obvious wrong. They x-rayed it a few times and we got sent home. And in my mind, it didn't even occur to me at that point that it could be JAA because my initial symptoms in the hip, there was no swelling because there was nowhere really for the swelling to go. So I didn't put two and two together. So I didn't think it could, it didn't even occur to me that it could be JAA. And it was only more as time went on and they put her foot in a plaster cast. And when the plaster came off, she then couldn't walk at all because it'd been immobilized for so long, which we now know that's kind of a really not a good thing to do with, with arthritis.
Mhm.
Um, and I kind of feel we were lucky in the sense that when the orthopedic consultant wasn't really getting anywhere, he called in very informally. He had a very good relationship with the pediatrician, and he called her into the appointment that day and said, do you know what's going on here? Because I can't find anything wrong. And she had seen JAA before, so she was familiar and knew that this could be JAA. So she made the referral to Great Ormond Street Hospital, which is where our paediatric rheumatology service is, and our closest one. And from then on, she got quickly diagnosed, started on methotrexate quickly, and she's had a very successful outcome. So her kind of life has been very different to what mine was. So she was soon, once the medication kicked in, she was soon able to go back to her sports and walking and running and playing and all the things she loves doing. I remember initially I did feel a kind of guilt once we knew what she had because I thought, oh my goodness, is it because I've got JA that she's got JA? Because there are these links, as in with autoimmune conditions, that there is that kind of hereditary link, even though the full genetics of it isn't understood yet. Um, and even though logically I kept telling myself, well, guilt is not going to help either her or me, and I knew that, but I couldn't help feeling that way to start with. I felt relief that once we found out what was wrong, because even though her diagnosis was relatively quick, in that period of waiting, you're still thinking, what is this? What could be wrong? And all those worries are going through your mind. But then once we did know what it was, I kind of felt, okay, so if she's got JAA and I had JAA and I've managed to live with it and I've been okay, she'll be okay. And it kind of gave me that hope to know she'll be okay. And of course, with the medications as well, as we learned more about, how good and effective they are, it kind of gave us even more hope to say, actually, her life's, going to be very different from mine. She's not, hopefully not going to get that long-term joint damage and everything else that I had. With her, again, it was different to mine. So she was affected in multiple joints with polyarticular JA. So she had her left ankle, her right knee, her fingers, her jaws affected. So she had various joints affected. But she's doing really well at the moment, and we can't wish for more really from that point of view.
Yeah, and I'm sorry to just fixate on this, but you just mentioned jaw, which made me want to say that's another differentiator between JIA and RA, because RA rarely affects the jaw. It can, but not nearly as high of a rate as jaw inflammation in seen in JIA. So that's just another thing to throw out there. So if you're an adult who had a history of, who has a diagnosis of juvenile idiopathic arthritis, that's something you want to keep looking out for. You're not suddenly not prone to that because you have because you're an adult. But yeah, I mean, it really is a testament, and I mean, to the way that the treatments have changed over the last few decades that she's, doing so well, despite having, I mean, having more joints involved typically would give you a worse prognosis, but than you with only quote unquote only one joint involved, although it was involved very heavily. But yeah, that's, hopeful. I'm hoping, cross fingers gently, that she, continues to do well on methotrexate. I'm in the methotrexate club with her. And has anything kind of been challenging with her, or any tips to share from, I'm thinking about the school environment. Are there any tips you give other parents? Because that's one of the FAQs I get when I volunteer with my local arthritis foundation summer camps, the juvenile arthritis summer family camps. And sometimes parents ask, like, how do I get her teachers to understand? I mean, it sounds like maybe your daughter doesn't need accommodations right now, but have you had to explain it to her teachers at all, that she might need an accommodation, or she might be sore some days?
Yeah, so, she's, in the UK, she's been at primary school up until last September, and then she's changed to secondary school.
Mhm.
And for us, it was really, really important to find the right secondary school for her where they would understand. We were very fortunate that her primary school were very, very flexible. So, where she has experienced fatigue, she'd be allowed to do half a day and they'd let her come home. But obviously, as she's got older, it's more important that she stays in, in her classes and doesn't miss her
Yeah.
lessons. So, yeah, we have had to put things in place to help her. And I just feel we have been fortunate in the schools she has been at and the teachers she's had, that they have been very understanding. I think it does help, if your medical team, if they're willing to support parents where schools aren't understanding so much. So, that's one of the things we've developed on our website. We actually have a letter template that we worked with some rheumatologists to develop, and that can be downloaded and kind of amended to make it relevant to each child, and then sent from the hospital. So the hospital can print it on their headed paper and send it to the school, or give it to the parent to give to school. And that just seems to carry more weight than a parent just saying, this is what's wrong with my child. Because I think with JAA, um, it is largely, in many cases, an invisible condition now, because the medication is so effective. Because people can't obviously see there's something wrong, it does make it harder to understand. So that letter is one of the things that really, really does help. And even with our amazing understanding school that we had, when they got a letter from the doctor, it kind of made it. It was like, their eyes were open to, oh, we didn't
Yeah.
realize she goes through all of this. So
Yes.
it's getting them to understand that the child they see in front of them, to kind of have that normal life, or as normal a life as possible, they actually go through a lot. They have those weekly
Yes.
injections, they have blood tests every few weeks, they have x-rays, MRIs, their life is full of hospital appointments. So actually, although the outcome is quite good in the sense that they can go and join in with activities and things, there's a lot that goes into that behind the scenes. And I think it's just
Mhm.
getting the school to really understand that. And once they do, I think they're a lot more accommodating and understanding of what that child needs. And I think the biggest tip I would give to parents and schools is plan for the worst. So plan for the worst days, plan for those bad days. So at my daughter's school, when we were looking around, for which school she would go to, I was checking for wheelchair access, because I knew that if things get worse, she will be back in that wheelchair. If she flares, and it will take a while to get it under control. So checking for wheelchair access, making sure they've got lifts, making sure they understand how variable her condition can be day to day. So, whilst on the whole the treatment's working, there are still some days that she may be in pain or really fatigued and struggling to join in with all her lessons. So they've given her a kind of timeout card where she can go to like student services, and if she needs a break from lessons, she has that flexibility to like leave the lesson and go and sit there and just have a rest. So yeah, they've been brilliant in doing every little thing we could ask for. And I think things like, again on on the JAR project website, there is a school fact sheet, and that's got some tips that any
Mhm.
school could put in place. So it's things like having access to a locker, maybe being given a second set of textbooks, so it's not too heavy to carry around, from home to school. You
Mhm.
can leave one set at school, have one set at home. Although nowadays a lot of the learning is electronic, so it's probably a bit less of an issue. Being aware of things that perhaps you wouldn't immediately think of. So children on methotrexate and some other medications may be more prone to sunburn, so they may need help
Mhm.
reapplying, sun lotion in the middle of the day at school in the summer months, and those kinds of things. So, and wearing supportive shoes as well is the other thing. The number of times I hear from parents, "Oh, my child is being told they have to wear like proper school shoes because it's not school uniform to wear like trainers or sneakers."
Oh,
um,
right. We don't have uniforms here unless it's a
oh,
private school.
okay.
So yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah.
I hear it's often, school shoes are black school shoes, and particularly for girls, they're not very supportive, generally the school shoes you get.
Okay.
So,
Oh, right.
Trinity, my daughter, she's always been allowed to wear trainers to school because they're more supportive and it's what her physiotherapist
Okay.
has recommended. So she's allowed to wear those, and school's been great about that. So something quite
Yeah.
simple really, and makes a big difference to that child.
Oh, absolutely, and I think it's such a, what's the word? There's a the it's the same principle applies to accommodations in the workplace as well, or looking at different places to work when you're an adult to say like, "Okay, how accommodating could this workplace possibly be?" I mean, there's all sorts of laws and stuff in the United States that govern whether or not you're gonna be given reasonable accommodations, but like you're saying, thinking about the principle of planning for your worst day and explaining the variability, the fluctuations to your potential employer or your teacher or your college professor. Those are such crucial things. So I think I've mentioned this before on the podcast, but in case you're like a new listener, I've been really disappointed at times when I used to work as a school-based occupational therapist. I overheard, a case where someone was like, well, this kid has juvenile arthritis, but like, and they're supposed to have accommodations to be able to sit out from PE or physical education or gym, but I saw them running on the playground the other day. And I'm like, well, you don't get it. Like, you
Yeah.
don't get just because they can run around the playground yesterday does not mean they can do it today. And so I know I'm preaching to the
Yeah.
choir to you and
Yeah.
anyone listening,
Yeah. No,
probably.
we hear exactly the same, that story. I could have told that exact same story.
Yeah.
It happens all, and I expect it happens all around the world, and it's not right. And until that level of awareness and understanding is there, throughout every community, I think we're always going to hear stories like that, sadly. So, that's why what you do and what we do is so important in helping to
Right.
change what's happening out there.
Yeah, yeah. Oh my gosh, thank you. I feel good. Sometimes I forget because I'm like, it's hard if you're like a problem solving type person because you're like, there's still so many problems, but you're like, no, I have to take a second and say good job for what we've done. And I like, there's that old parable of the person like throwing, um, s- I almost said seahorses,
Yeah.
starfish into the
Yes,
ocean.
yes,
Yeah, one
yes.
at a time. And it's like, it made a difference to that one. I have to
That
remind
one. Yeah,
myself that every day.
exactly. Yeah. I love that story. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you. This is great. I mean, I do want to respect your time, and I have some rapid fire questions that
Yeah.
are potentially could be a whole hour because they're like big questions. But do you have any best words of wisdom for children or no, adults who newly understand that they have juvenile idiopathic arthritis still, or people
Yeah.
diagnosed with JIA?
Yep. So I think I'd mainly say it does get easier. I think those early days are so overwhelming, and I think it can be a really scary time. It can be a lonely time, but just hold on to that hope that it does get easier. So the medications, you kind of get used to them, and you kind of get to the point where you know what you're doing. I always tell the story of how my daughter, when she was first diagnosed, we ended up on 11, like it was 11 times a day we had to give her different medications because she had uveitis as well. So it was like eye drops 4 times a day,
Oh,
and she was, before the methotrexate kicked in, she needed naproxen several times, so it was kind of everything was kind of building up. And I had alarms set, 11 points through the day to give her medications, and that was overwhelming, as well as her hospital appointments and everything else that was going on. So it definitely does get easier because generally, as the condition gets under control and improves, things become a lot more manageable, and you kind of adjust to that new, your new normality of, this is what our life is like now, and you do make that adjustment as well. So yeah, it gets easier. Hang on in there.
yeah, I love that. I absolutely love that. And do you have a favorite, or you or your daughter have a favorite arthritis gadget or tool in your toolbox?
So I I was thinking about this, and I was thinking, I don't necessarily have a favorite gadget as such, because I have used crutches for several times, during my life
Mm-hmm.
when I had my hip replaced and as a teenager, and other times when I'm having a bad flare. Um, but for me, I think it's more of something to remember is actually no one knows your body as well as you do. So I think it's more about listening to your body and doing what feels right for you. So in the past, I've come a bit unstuck when a physiotherapist has said, you've got to do these exercises and this will help you. And I've really tried hard and done them, and it's kind of made me worse. And I wish I'd kind of said to them at the time, this isn't working out for me, so that they could adjust it. So the latest physio I saw, actually, I was very honest with her about my limitations. And so she was very mindful of really gentle exercises that would help me rather than perhaps going too far that, kind of making things worse. So, with listening to the advice of your doctors and physiotherapists and your medical team, just have that discussion and say, if this is not going to work for me, to kind of be open with them and let them know. So, trust that you know your own body better than other
Mhm.
people do, I think. Having said that, actually, my bed is a very firm bed, and I couldn't manage without that. So it's probably bigger
Oh,
than a gadget or tool, but having a very
no, that
firm bed
is
is
yeah.
really important. So
Yeah, and I'm realizing the gadget or tool is really more for I'm biased towards people with hand issues or upper extremity issues because that's where my rheumatoid arthritis is most active. So I'm thinking those little ones like the kitchen openers and stuff. But yeah, a firm bed is huge, especially for hip pain.
yeah.
If that helps, your sleeping, what do they call it? Your sleep ergonomics. I certainly understand that. And I think, yeah, listening to your body is such a tricky one. It's such a tricky one because there's different kinds of pain. Like I was explaining to someone the other day about how like I've started strength training and I know how to push through, or I know that it's okay in my body to push through muscle pain, but not joint pain,
Yeah.
but I can really feel the difference between those two. But for somebody who might be new to exercise, they might not, you just have to, yeah, like you said, you've lived it for so long now that you have got a good sense of your body, and takes a lot of advocacy to tell that to a physiotherapist. So good job. Do you have a favorite this is literally I just love talking about, like, pop culture or, like, culture, whatever we call it. Do you have a favorite book or movie or show you have
Yeah.
been into?
Yeah, so I kind of feel I missed out on reading as a child because I don't remember having many like books. I think I only had like two or three kind of storybooks on my shelf. I didn't have many
Oh,
books, whereas my,
interesting.
my children are blessed to have so many books to choose from. So I kind of came to reading really only once I had children, and it became my little bit of me time was to
Mm.
grab a book and read. So yeah, now I love to read. If I can find time to read or make time to read, I love reading. So a friend lent me Lessons in Chemistry just recently. I absolutely loved that book. But I
Yes.
also love, I just have to mention my very favorite author is Kristen Hanna, and I love all of her, every book I've read by her, I absolutely love it.
Oh,
She just
okay.
has
Look
such
her up.
great kind of characters. And there's another author, Victoria Hislop, and she writes historical
Oh.
fiction. And I really love all of her books. And I think the first one I started on was called The Island. And I don't know if you read it or if you know about it, but
No, I read
in
the night sorry, I'm a minute behind you. I
oh,
read The
sorry.
Nightingale by Kristen Hanna.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes, that was my first Kristen Hanna book I
Yeah.
read. And then at the back of that one, it had a little bit about one of her other books. So then I went on to read that, and I just haven't stopped. I've just made my way through pretty
Beautiful.
much all of her books now. So,
That's what I do too. I find an author I like and I just like devour everything they've ever written. I love it. Okay, thank you for thank you
yes.
for reminding me because I read just The Nightingale. I didn't read any others.
Oh, yeah. I'll
Um,
quickly finish mentioning about the
oh yeah.
island because it's set in
Oh
the
yes, yes.
time, and it's about like the condition of leprosy, and it just inspired me
Oh,
so much that in that person's lifetime that the story's about, a cure for leprosy was found. So I kind of think if that can happen within one person's lifetime, why can't it happen for JIA? That's kind of what, what I hold on to. So I absolutely love it.
yes.
It's a fictional book, but based on kind of real life events at the time. So yeah, I find that
Yeah.
hugely inspiring.
Oh, that's amazing. Thank you.
Oh,
I'm
I
a-
also
I'm
I've got also I'm so sorry, I'm going to take up all your time,
no,
but
do it.
I have a favorite movie as well that I have to
Oh
mention, and
yes.
that's Lorenzo's Oil. Have you watched Lorenzo's Oil?
No, I don't think so. I've heard of it.
And again, that is based on a true story. And this young lad, and I can't remember the exact condition because it's been many years since I watched it, but it's his
Mm.
dad that finds the cure for the condition.
Oh
And although
wow.
it can't cure him because it's kind of degenerated to a certain point, the cure that's found has helped all the children since then that have this condition. And so, yeah, so when my husband said, actually, I want to find a cure for JAA, I was thinking, well, the odds are in his favor because he's got a biological scientific background. So yeah,
Yes.
let's go for it.
That's, like, my favorite kind of people, are the people who, like, just say, "Here's a problem, like, I'm gonna do something." Like, I'm gonna yeah, and I don't know if you listened to the episode from the Ben Arroyo Research Institute on my podcast, but they're in Seattle, actually, but the researchers there were saying I was actually shocked that they said that they think a cure for adult rheumatoid arthritis will come in my lifetime. Because usually PhD scientists don't say that unless they really think
Yeah.
it will happen. So that's episode
I
one
hope
of.
so. I hope so. I so hope so. And I'm always so encouraged to hear about, the latest research. And I know you're very much into, finding out all the latest research and developments, because it is encouraging. Everything that's going on out there, there is so much to be encouraged by, whether it's new treatments coming on board or the more that they're finding out about, the condition. It helps us understand it better. So yeah, no, there's a lot of good science going on.
Yeah, I think I'm again crossing our fingers for us. Do you have a favorite mantra or inspirational saying?
Yeah, so I have two for this one, if that's
Okay,
okay, if I'm allowed to
great.
use.
Yeah, of course. This is
One of
oh,
them is, "It's never too late to be who you might have been." And
mm,
I don't know who said that, but I remember seeing it once and I thought, "Yeah, I'm having that quote as one of my quotes." And I remember when I had my hip replaced, and that was 6 years ago. 6 years ago tomorrow, actually. Tomorrow's my hip anniversary.
Oh, okay. I was
Um,
gonna
uh,
ask you when you got it. Okay, so it's after your both your kids were born?
all 3 of my children, yes.
Oh, 3. Oh, 3. Oh, but I thought you had 2 for some unknown reason. Okay. Oh my goodness. Okay.
But I remember lying in that hospital bed, and for me, I found it a difficult operation to go through, because it everything I tried to read about beforehand, it was all aimed at older, 70-year-olds having
Mhm.
a hip replacement. There was very little out there for anyone I was 40 years old at the time. There's very little information out there
Mm.
for kind of my age group. So I did, on my personal blog, I documented the whole thing, and I ended up, writing up about it, because I thought if someone else is looking for that information, I want there to be something out there. And I remember lying in that hospital bed and thinking, if I get through this, I can get through anything. And yeah, so that quote is up there as a kind of reminder of that. It's never too late to be who you might have been. And it's just a reminder to get out of your comfort zone and follow your heart, try
Yeah.
something different, see what happens. And my second favorite quote, and I think this goes back to what we've been talking about hoping for a cure for these conditions.
Mhm.
And I think it's a Nelson Mandela quote, and it says, "It always seems impossible until it's done."
Yeah.
And I just love that, because there are people that even we've come across, that they almost don't dare to believe that it's possible, that a cure could be found and that things can improve. Um and actually we want to believe that, and we want to see it happen. And when it does happen, it will be like, oh, okay, so it was possible. And so that quote kind of reflects that belief that, one day we'll get there, and it will happen.
I love it. I love it. What has been bringing you joy recently or right now?
um I think I just try to appreciate, like, the little things in life, really. So when I wake up and I'm having a less bad day and my back's not so stiff, and I feel like, yeah,
Mhm.
today I can maybe do a household chore, or something that other people probably wouldn't find that exciting. I kind of
Yeah.
feel, if I feel able to do it that day, that I feel quite happy about that. Or if I make time to have a bit of time to myself to read a book, or that those sorts of things, just little things that I just kind of appreciate. And even something simple as being able to walk, I kind of never take that for granted, because
Yes.
I've had to relearn to walk like 3 times in my life, after being on crutches, after my hip replacement. So I just never take something like that for granted, because I think, there was a time I couldn't do it, and I had to learn again how to do it. So
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I cannot stop myself from asking this is back from 2 questions ago, but I was gonna ask, when you read, do you read on an e-reader, an electronic reader, or do you read, physical books or audiobooks? How do you like to consume
I
books?
I prefer physical books, because I
Okay.
kind of like to know where I am in a book and see how much further I've got
Yeah,
to go. And yeah, I
yeah.
definitely prefer a physical book, but for practical reasons. So if I am going for a hospital appointment to London, and I'm going to be carrying a book, with me, I kind of think, well, actually, I might as well get an ebook on my phone, because then it's one less thing to carry. So I'm always weighing up, the practicalities of it as well, and the carrying is because I do get a lot of back pain, linked to my arthritis and my condition. So I always
Yeah.
try and balance it up. But my preference is a physical book. I'm not very good with audio stuff, because I don't particularly like listening to music, because I find I can't concentrate on anything else. And it's the opposite in the
Mhm.
rest of my family. My children and my husband, they need music in the background. And I'm like, no, no,
Uh-huh.
no, I need it quiet, because I need to concentrate.
Yeah.
And it's the same for things like podcasts. If I want to listen, I prefer, when you have a transcript of your podcast, I prefer to
Yes.
read through the transcript, because
Mhm.
I'm just, and YouTube videos and things, I just don't. I find I can't do anything else. Some people might be able to listen and do something else, whereas I can't. If I am listening to a podcast, I will have to sit there and listen to that. That is all I'm doing at that moment.
Mhm.
So in reality, I prefer to have something to read through. If I can read, if I can read it, I prefer that usually.
Yeah, that's why I provide the transcripts. I actually, when I'm learning something new in particular, I auditory is not my strong, it's my weakest learning method. Like I need to typically I would like to read something to get it into my head. That being said, I can multitask when listening to podcasts. So I love do listen while I'm like cooking or, but if it's a really important part, I will sometimes pause it if I have to like focus on something else. But anyway, it's just a little debate that was going on in my Instagram stories of like, do you prefer the e-readers or audiobooks or physical books? But yeah, sometimes it can, for me with thumb and finger pain, it can be hard to hold open the book. So
Yeah.
I like to do the e-reader. Okay, but back to the list. What does it mean to you to live a good life and thrive with rheumatic disease?
So I absolutely love the way you word that question to
Yeah.
say, a good life. And it's not a great life, it's not a normal life, but a good life. I love that
Yes.
wording because it reminds me of one of the mums that I'm in contact with. She always tells me, she says, "You helped me see that my child can have a good life despite having JEA." And she uses that word, a good life. And I think it kind of accurately reflects the fact that the things that we've talked about already, there are still challenges, there are side effects of medication, there's everything else that goes alongside having a chronic condition. So it kind of probably isn't accurate to say, normal life, but it's a good life is a good way to think of it. So um, I feel, in my case, I feel despite my scenario perhaps being one of the worst in terms of, the hip damage was done, there were no medications, no treatments, I didn't have a rheumatologist for all those years. So despite all of that situation being kind of really bad, worst case scenario type situation, I look back at my life and I think I have had a good life. I feel, I've achieved all the milestones I wanted to achieve. So, I went to university, I had a job that I wanted to have, had my children, got married, all of those things that I wanted to do, I've been able to do in spite of, all the odds being against me in terms of, my condition. And I just think for children nowadays, the outlook is so much brighter than that. So there's absolutely nothing that needs to stop them from, if they've got JEA, they can follow their dreams, they can do whatever they want. And I think as parents, we should encourage our children with JEA, not limit them in any way. And my daughter, she loves penguins, and she always says, "I want to be a penguinologist."
That's my
And
favorite animal. Sorry. Yeah,
oh,
I love
so
penguins.
you have a lot in common with her, with your Taylor Swift,
Yeah,
and
Taylor
the
Swift and
penguins.
penguins. We could do a global tour of looking at the 17 species of penguins and
Oh,
then Taylor Swift concerts. I
yes, yes.
see it
Oh,
all
she's
now.
got she's got a whole book she made when she was younger about all the different species of penguins with their
Yeah,
sizes, where they live, where you can find them. It's
that
amazing.
is, yep,
So
that's similar.
the practical side of me wants to say, as a mum, I think, well, if she went off to study penguins, like, would there be enough medical help for her if she was to flare? All those things go through my mind. And then I think, actually, I'm not going to stop her following her dreams. Why can't she do that? She absolutely can. So, whatever she wants to do, she can do. And I believe that's true of any child with JEA, because for many, many children, the treatments are effective. They can go on to live a very full, very active life, and their JEA does not have to hold them back.
Yeah. Well, and I first of all, if you really were speaking my love language when you were like deconstructing my sentence, because I'm very particular actually. Although on the one hand, I go on long like tangents and sometimes put my foot in the mouth. On the other hand, when I'm writing things down, I'm very, very picky in particular about what words I use and how I structure things because the meaning of the implication of these words is important, right? So what does it mean to you to live a good life, with arthritis, with rheumatic disease? And I feel very stubborn in a positive sense to say like, let's look at the possibilities to still have a good life. And I do think it's interesting the whole idea of like, I think that my personal opinion was that there are limitations that we have and everyone has them either whether it's, emotional limitations because you've had trauma in your upbringing or limitations in your self-esteem or limitations in your physical body. There surely are some limits that someone would have with, in my opinion, again, this is me being practical, having arthritis. Like, I'm not going to become a massage therapist. Like, my thumbs are not going to tolerate that, but at the same time, I can say there's still so much still available to me. You can channel that love let's say if what I love about massage is helping people feel better, well, I can channel that in a different way. Or if you love
Yeah.
penguins, you can be the person in Antarctica helping the penguins, or in South, Africa, or in, South America, or New Zealand or Australia, or you could be the person that maybe is on the ground communicating, like
Yeah.
there's so many
Yeah.
possibilities. So being creative and seeing the workarounds is is key, instead of trying to force your child into a quote unquote, oh, they have to have an exactly quote unquote normal life like every other
Yeah.
kid. It's
Yeah.
kind of a farce, because no one, like, who is the person that has that normal life? Do you know what I mean? Like everyone's, anyway, we're all comparing ourselves to someone else. Um, and we don't want to artificially suffer because we think we're not having something that actually, that we're lacking something that actually nobody has, which is like a normal life.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, normal is overrated. I need t-shirts for that.
We're so on the same wavelength
Yeah.
actually, because in my notes I said, I don't compare my life to others because
Oh,
actually that can hold you back and it can lead to disappointment, if you
yes.
are thinking. So for me, I accepted very early on that I'm never going to be able to do I'm not going to become a sports, I'm not going to become a sports athlete.
Yeah.
I kind of accepted that so early on that it never felt like a limitation. So instead of
Mhm.
focusing on all the things I can't do, I kind of end up thinking, yeah, but I can do this, and I can do that. Like you say, it's other ways of looking at things and seeing, different scenarios and different ways of doing things. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really is in a way. I feel like I've become a more flexible person, through having RA. And I mentioned earlier, I'm kind of a control freak, but so by nature, kind of want to control things. It's actually more from my anxiety, because having control gives me the illusion that, or not having control makes me feel anxious. So I grasp onto control, but having a condition that's kind of out of your control in some ways, is forces you to confront, oh yeah, I don't always have control. Look, I'm still here. Like, I didn't die? So you kind of have to like confront your limitations. But yeah, no, so similar. And I think social media has really been like two steps forward, one step back for me with that comparisonitis, because it's like it's all good in your real life to be like, I have confidence, la la la. But on social media, it's like every day you're confronted with all these positive things like support and education and empowerment. And then on the other hand, you're like, if you're in a not in a good mental place, you're looking like, why is she doing so much better than I'm doing? Or why, you forget that you're just seeing a tiny sliver,
Yeah.
of someone's life. So I think it's good, like you said, to remind yourself, not just stay in your lane, live your life. You're not living someone else's life.
Yeah.
But anyways, sorry. You're a good listener, so I just keep talking. But okay, is there anything else you wanted to share with the listeners before we wrap up?
I think it's just, for parents, I would just say to them, stay hopeful, help
Mm,
help raise awareness of the condition so that, many parents, when their child's diagnosed, they say, I never even knew children can get arthritis. So, just pass that on to others in your own community. So help raise awareness. Connect with us at Juvenile Arthritis Research. We always love to hear from, the parents and families that we're connected with. And I think I'd say don't accept pain for your child, because I
mhm.
think it's hard to know what the how good things can be when they're in that when they're first diagnosed, and that child's maybe not able to walk or not able to hold something, whatever it is, they whatever joints affected, or whatever it is they can't do. You don't realize what the best situation can be for them. You don't realize how good the medication can be and how effective it can be. So I would just say, please keep going back to your doctors if your child's not getting their kind of life back, as it were. So if they're still struggling and you've given the medication a chance to work and they're still not right and they're still in pain, don't
Right.
accept that, because that doesn't need to be part of the condition these days. Go back to your doctors, because they have got lots more scope for different treatments to try, maybe changing the dose of the treatment. There's lots and lots of things they can do to make sure that child is able to live that good life and to, have a very full, active life. So that's
Yeah.
that's something I've just noticed, that sometimes people kind of accept the pain because they don't realize that that child can be pain free these days. So yeah, just
Yes.
that's kind of my final word of advice. Just keep advocating for, parents, advocate for your children, those young adults or people with JA themselves, just understand your condition and advocate for yourself as best you can as well.
And I think that stay hopeful is great for anyone, the parents of kids, but with arthritis and adults with arthritis, it is, we have to hold on to some hope, not necessarily that there's going to be a cure tomorrow, but hope that we will weather the storms. So where can people find you online?
So our website is www.jarproject.org, and we are on all the major social media channels as well. So you can find us on Instagram, and that's at underscore jar project,
Mhm.
and Twitter or X as it is, we're just at jar project, and
Yeah.
on Facebook, we're on Facebook as well. We even have LinkedIn profile, and
Oh,
on
that's
YouTube
great.
as well. So we have YouTube channels. So you can find us on all those major channels. And if you go to our website, there should be links to all of those
Yes.
to kind of follow from there. So
Yes, and I'm going to put links to all of the things we've talked about here in the show notes, which are always on my website. That you can get to it by going to myarthritislife.net. The long URL is like arthritis.theenthusiasticlife.com because that's the domain I got a long time ago. Anyway, but thank you so much for your time. This was really illuminating. Like your story is so or your passion is really inspiring, and I know that there's so many people walking around now who are living a more hopeful existence because of all your work. So thank you so much again, and hopefully people will connect with you after this episode airs.
thank you. Thank you.
Yay, bye
Thank
bye for
you. Bye
now.
bye.